Okay, so I guess it's no secret that for a while, when the cloud first arrived, everyone was like, well, let's rush to the cloud. There's so many benefits. Remove everything from on-prem and do that. And then there's maybe a little bit of sort of dissatisfaction, and now we've got to the stage where people are beginning to understand that it's perhaps not the nirvana that it was certainly sold as. And so we're getting to see more people bringing at least certain applications, workloads, etc., back on prem. And I think the official title of that is data repatriation. So yeah, if you can just perhaps give your observations on that sort of scenario, what particularly why it is happening.
Well, sure. So I think when there was sort of a rush to the cloud initially, all the providers made it really simple to get your data out there and very low cost, right? So they'd send you an appliance, either a transfer box or a snowball or a transfer appliance of some kind to put your data on, and it's just really easy. You plug it in, plug your network in, high-speed network, dump all your terabytes of data, and ship it off, and now it's on the cloud like the next day. And they made it really easy. But I think that there are a few instances for different types of workflows where that might not be, like having everything live 100% on the cloud isn't always the best for what your application is. If you have like something that's sort of like transactional, like OLTP databases or things, and you need that ultra low latency where like milliseconds between clicks will send clients away, that works really, really well on the cloud because the cloud is everywhere and very close to end users. But if you need access to high volumes of data, it can sort of get in your way, and then trying to claw that data back can get expensive.
And in terms of the so you sort of outlined something behind why people might reconsider the cloud, but the sort of the major three would potentially be, I mean, the performance you mentioned there. I think performance optimization, just being able to access, as I guess, is having the security of access. And then you said, you described the situation obviously early on. They kind of, I won't say they gave it away for free, but they made it very easy and low cost. But I think as people try to make everything enterprise fit, they suddenly found out that there were, should we say additional, I won't say hidden, but additional costs. So suddenly maybe it didn't stack up from a financial point of view. So yeah, just again, thoughts as to each of those as to what people have encountered, I guess, but as they've
So
gone into the
so
cloud.
I'm in Los Angeles, and I've worked around media and entertainment a lot, and media and entertainment's not real, like their sort of workflows are actually kind of common to everybody else, and they're very cost sensitive. So it's a really good test case, because if you do something that solves a media and entertainment solution, whether it's hardware, software, or networking, it's probably going to work for architecture, engineering, any kind of business where they have large volumes of data, industrial design, automotive design, things like that. So initially in the film industry, a lot of the studios and post houses sort of did a rush to the cloud, and it worked. And then during COVID, there was like even more. It was like having everything on the cloud worked really well. But then there were certain elements where you need like super high security, and you need access to data, like you need your hot data sort of on site. And so a lot of the people that went, the studios that went to the cloud, ended up sort of creating new data centers. Like, their data centers had sort of languored for a while, and then they sort of built them back up, and they put their hot data there so that they could have access to it 24/7. And there's been a lot of talk about, the film industry about like going camera to cloud, where you shoot something on a set, and it all of a sudden it's in the data center, and everybody globally can access it. And it's like, well, that's terrific. When it works, it's really great, but you can't have some, a feature film or somebody's industry where, like, a feature film is a good example just because you have like 100 people on set on a location somewhere. And if the data connection from the set to the cloud goes down, you have nothing. And you've got 100 people standing around costing you $1 million a day. And that's sort of a microcosm for a lot of other industries, right? Like they have similar, less exciting, but similar workflows where they might need hot access to like the most current data, and lots of times it's much larger. Whereas the end result, if you're designing things, mechanical design, industrial design, the files for that can be terabytes that one person is working on, and they need full access to that, like on their workstation. And so remoting into a data center can work, but sometimes it's much better just to have that, that super low latency of having it on site and having a real physical workstation. So, we saw, like, during COVID, there were hundreds of millions of Chromebooks that went out in the industry. I think those are starting to be updated again because they've kind of aged out at 2.5, 3 years for a Chromebook, because those are always minimal. But a lot of workstations went home with people at the time too, and the workstations that they might have at an office sort of went into like the data center at the office kind of, and a lot of those have been aging out. So I think that sort of lull that we've had for almost 2 years where people haven't been buying servers and workstations, part of that's because everybody hoarded equipment from storage and memory and workstations and laptops and network routers and everything kind of got hoarded during COVID. People bought way in advance and because there were shortages, and I think people are have been working through those caches of stuff that they have. But now we're getting to the point where there's new technology coming out in the data center with artificial intelligence, and PCIe Gen 5 is starting to hit the data center, and the new Grace Hopper chips from NVIDIA that like sort of accelerate artificial intelligence, and then all of the the NPUs and other processors that are coming out supporting Gen 5, lower latency, higher bandwidth. That's going to really shift gears in the next 18 months. We should see PCIe Gen 5 really take over in the data center. Right now, I think there's a lot of legacy PCIe Gen 3 that's out there. The things that people are buying currently for data center are PCIe Gen 4. And when you go to 5, that means a faster memory bus. It means a faster bus for all of the NVMe fabric, the storage fabric. And so, you go from DDR4 to DDR5, DDR6 and PCIe Gen 6 are, are right around the corner as far as, the calendar goes. 2 years is sort of nothing at all in data center time.
And so, I mean, so the result of all this, I guess, is a sort of merged or a hybrid sort of approach to infrastructure resources. And I mean, okay, so people have maybe understood that, cloud and on-prem both have the sort of roles to play. But how easy is it? I mean, you've given certain examples, but is it always obvious, shall we say, what belongs in the cloud and what's on-prem? Or are there quite a lot of, shall we say, more grey areas where people need to really understand what's important, or just your thoughts as to how one goes about deciding what belongs where?
Well, I think they can come about organically because the IT, the service departments that support companies, they get response back from their end users of what the pain points are. If somebody's complaining that their workstation or laptop or email is too slow, or there's certain functions that they have that just aren't working, they're going to get complaints about that, right? And I think you can also look at the bill for data center, because if you're uploading a bunch of stuff and storing it, uh, you know that that's like you can sort of forecast that, and it can be a known thing. But if you need to, for some reason, get an archive back off because, say, an old project comes back up and you need 100% hot access to it, and you don't have any copies of that project because it was from a time when you were all in the cloud, you're going to have to pay some steep dollars to get that data sent back to your own data center. The obviously the cloud is somebody else's computer, and there are some things where it might make sense to, like if it's something that's very expensive and very high end, and has a really quick turnover. If you have to spend $250,000 to get some kind of supercomputer, that might be better to rent, because until you know that you're going to be using that supercomputer 24/7. Where if you're using it a solid 8 hours a day, and then the rest of the time it sits there amortizing without paying for itself, it's probably not a bad investment just to use the cloud services, right? But if you've got hot data that you're using globally 24/7, and you need guaranteed uptime, and you have the budget to have the staff to run it, then it totally makes sense to repatriate that, bring it back to your own, make your own cloud, right? Your private cloud, and that goes for home users as well. It's like somebody getting like some kind of appliance that has 2 hard drives just to make sure that they have copies of everything locally when they want it. It is something that sort of it can make a lot more sense for larger companies. If I think there's some genetic companies that have had some instances where they just went from having their own data center to doing it on the cloud, and part of what you give away is that's your data. And every time you need to touch it, you're paying somebody else to touch your own data. So I think that there's been some good instances out there in the public, just for trying to figure out that balance. I think if it has to do with people on the web trying to access your data, like if they're buying things, that's a great use for the web. If it's things for internal employees, if you're have a lot of databases and things that you're trying to run locally to make your company run, you probably want to balance that between internal resources and the cloud, for people that are in the field, but having it internal for your own use.
And in terms of the sort of the self-sufficiency argument, which people sometimes use, I mean, clearly internally you can have IT issues, but I guess you feel at least they're under your control. So as long as you know what's going on, whereas the cloud, and I've no sort of experience particularly, but other than as a private user, shall we say, but in terms of the cloud, I mean, are there issues, well documented or whatever, in terms of one tends to assume these people know what they're doing and therefore it all works perfectly, but I'm guessing that's not necessarily the case. There is downtime, and again, to the examples you explained, if you've got a load of data up there and you're keen to be using it and you can't access it, and I suspect it's not that necessarily very easy to find the person that can tell you what the problem is or even solve it for you. So yeah, just I suppose compare and contrast the sort of having the self-sufficiency versus in the cloud.
Well, I think too, there's an issue where, like, if you want to have your own data center, you do have to have a staff of Windows and Linux engineers working to maintain things and patch things on the fly and keep that up. And I think that was probably some of the attraction to going all on the cloud at first, is like, look at all, we've got all this staff doing this. We're paying, millions of dollars for this overhead of technology staff. We could just get rid of all those folks and put it on the cloud. And it's like, well, now you're just paying somebody else's technology staff to do it for you, and you might be paying more. Maybe it works for your business model because you can pay it monthly rather than have it be a liability of overhead for staff where you have to pay healthcare and all that. But I think when you balance it out, you might actually be paying less to have that army of Linux engineers that are working 24/7 to keep your company going, rather than just writing, big checks every month.
And I guess as well on the financial side, I mean, clearly in all walks of life, there are pros and cons of sort of renting versus actually owning assets. But as I say, I get the impression that the cloud was seen as being, should we say, good value for money, or for most people, they thought it was going to be less expensive, I guess, than on-prem. But as you say, I mean, depending on how long you use it over a period of time, you will presumably end up paying more just because you're paying on and on a monthly fee. Whereas if you buy some assets at some point, they're written off the balance sheet, you're paid, so they're therefore free assets. But again, perhaps you can just sort of compare and contrast those two sort of approaches or thoughts.
Well, the cloud isn't all even, right? It's like if I get a virtual machine on the cloud, I'm not guaranteed to get a CPU from maybe even this decade. I might, I might, like if I'm in a low tier, like low cost, I'm setting up some kind of server. I might have a fraction of, maybe I've got 8 cores on a machine from 2019 that's still in the data center, and I'm sort of shoveled off into this corner. Whereas if you need like the most recent, in that case, it might actually be less expensive to be running that kind of data center load on your own. Where if I think that, like I said, if you need something like the access to the latest CPU and GPU type things to make your workflow go, those are expensive assets to obtain and to run, and so that could be perfect for having tier one access. I think a lot of our customers, for tier one, we do contract manufacturing a lot for and create devices for people like that. The tier two providers, so like small local cloud providers that might run data centers regionally or even nationally or internationally, but they're not quite to the level of like the big players. They buy our channel products, so like for the tier one, it's sort of like contract manufacturing. They design their own SSDs. They probably like they have real tight specifications of the type of memory that they have, and everybody's got like their own sort of spec that they design to, because in the end they want to have like at 3.5 years of that data center running, they want to be able to like evaluate all those assets and see that they're almost all the way worn out, and they can just shove it in a grinder and sell the powder back to China to have to be processed and recycled. They don't want tier one doesn't want things that are durable, whereas like the tier two, they're looking, rather than 3 years of a data center, they're looking like at 5 years, and then probably not retiring it will become their sort of tier two inside. So like if you go to like some of the tier two cloud providers, they might have some old servers or workstations from longer ago, but they're very affordable, and that's something that you can pay them to maintain, or if you have the staff in a big enough company, you can do that yourself, sort of. So in a way, the tier two providers are kind of more in competition with what you might do for your own data center. Unless, like bigger companies definitely could, a lot of what they do, they could, I think they're looking at pulling it back from, not 100% back from the cloud, but like sort of making their own cloud. When you have like a national company where you need to support people in the field, it's good to have the cloud, but definitely there's pluses to having 100% control over your hot data.
And so, I mean, for quite a while, there was a mantra of, we're a cloud first company, or you want to be a cloud first company. So I'm guessing we haven't moved all the way back. So we haven't reversed it. So we're not now wanting people to be on-prem first companies, but this, we seem to be back to this high. I mean, is it hybrid first? Is that fair to say? So it really is a question of people fully understanding applications, where best, etc., and then coming up with a balance. And I'm sure it's not going to be 50-50 for most companies, but it's going to be a reasonable balance between cloud and on-prem, depending on, as you say, the type of applications and yes, to a certain extent, the personnel, etc. But just your sort of thoughts as to where the pendulum has swung to, if that makes sense.
Well, I think what may end up happening is we have to redefine what the cloud is, because up till now the cloud has been machines in a data center for the most part, right? And but more and more, I think I don't know if it's 10 to 1 or 100 to 1 of the growth for edge computing, and that with AI applications going into use, GPUs on the edge, network switches, there's boxes all around people's neighborhoods, that are owned by Verizon or AT&T or other data providers, where you've got this edge compute, which is probably going to outnumber the CPUs in the data center. They'll be lower power but because you're trying to move that service closer to the users, and that's part of the cloud, right? The edge is part of the cloud, but in some respects, having your like an appliance at home or in your office, if you've got a QNAP type, like a small business might have a QNAP device that's in multiple locations, and they snapshot to each other, and part of that, that's through the cloud, but it's sort of a hybrid type solution, and so they may have 100% of that backed up to AWS or Azure or Google, but they also have 100%. They're using the cloud maybe more as a fail-safe backup, but they're relying on that either Windows Server or network compliance to provide them the data locally for the company. And I think that goes all the way down to home users, right? The mini version of that, and scales right up to Fortune 500 companies. We've got a data center over here that just like 50 feet away, where we have everything, but we do have cloud backups of it, and we have our sort of own data centers around the globe, different locations, London, Los Angeles, or Fountain Valley, Taiwan, so on.
And I'm just wondering as well, I mean, there was another sort of split cloud-wise, in that the suggestion was, if you're a company under a certain size, then it's almost guaranteed that the cloud will give you better value for money, in terms of you won't have, as you've outlined earlier, you won't have the internal resource. It'll give you access to technology that you potentially couldn't afford to purchase, etc. And then you get to a certain size, then at least you've got the resources internally, if you so wish, to be on premises. Is it still is that still a major divide between cloud and on-prem, or is it a bit more sophisticated than that?
Well, I do think, it's like if you're a company, with 50 to a couple hundred employees, you definitely have to have the budget to have the staff to run your own data center, right? I mean, it's not insignificant, but if your company really relies on massive amount of data center use, I think it does, if you're a dozen people, that's one thing, it's like it's much easier to run your entire enterprise off the cloud because you probably don't have the resources to have an army of Linux engineers, like I said, maintaining things and patching any holes as they come up. But and there's also the fact that like when I look at computers, I look at them as they like because we're more on the side where people are selling computers. You want to like look at replacing them every 18 months. Data centers are maybe 3 to 5 years, depending on who the data center is. And I think a lot of companies want to, like if you can't budget for like sort of like upgrades and replacements, if you buy like a server and so much storage in that, you might think 18 months to 24 months from now about not retiring that server, but upgrading it, like adding capacity or, finding a way to expand it as needed. And Kingston does a lot of that type of business as well. It's like we make SSDs and we make computer memory. And so that's perfectly in line. And I think that's true of both, tier one providers, the big guys, and tier two and all the way down to small business. Is I think that there's definitely certain models where having it all be all cloud could work for you, but I think that just as we sort of accelerate, there's certain things where like if it's compute and GPU and sort of edge type things, that's very hard to maintain a budget for internally. But if it's purely storage and retaining your data, that's something that like I think almost everybody could afford to have their local copy of. And to sort of hybridize that the storage portion of it. Compute's a different story.
Maybe just finally, I mean, sustainability is a big thing for the overall industry, and again, is there a particular play? Does one side or the other come out clearly ahead when it comes to people say the cloud potentially just because they're using resources more efficiently, etc., as opposed to on-prem where you might have a load of kit that's maybe drawing power but not actually doing much in terms of running apps and stuff. But is it that simple, or again, are there more nuances in terms of the sustainability argument?
Well, I do think that the out of necessity and fortunately I think the natural tendency towards greed works well with sustainability to a certain extent, because the most expensive part of the data center is the power, right? So they want them to be lower power, like devices to be lower power. They want them to be easy to recycle, because they, when they have to dispose of it, if it was full of toxins, it's more expensive. So there is a financial push to make things more green. And having data centers that require less cooling, lower power, figuring out ways to get like more processing with lower power into a rack is their main goal, right? And when you buy your own you know, furnish your own data center, you are locked in for the life of that for the power use. It's like the CPU and the memory and the storage. They're not going to use any less electricity, and that the likelihood that your electricity bill is going to go down is pretty low. So you know, to a certain extent, maybe running for certain things, running data centers, you know, off of data centers could be more green, because I do think that they really are motivated to do it. But I think that you know, the OEMs are also motivated to make their, you know, devices lower power. So it's sort of like when you go to buy that, you know, you want to buy the best thing for you, and to look at the power and the resources that it takes, sort of, you know, balancing, you know, the power intake and the output that you can actually use it for. So it's all a big calculation, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's good combos. I was just thinking as you're talking that obviously if you're on-prem and your data, clearly your data moves around, but if it's on-prem, it's probably not moving that far. Whereas if you're constantly sending data to and from the cloud, doesn't sound very environmentally friendly to be, you know, moving data more than you need to. But again, I'm sure there are endless other bits to the equation, but it is quite complex, I'm sure. So, but no, I mean, Mark, it's been lovely to chat to you. Fascinating conversation, some lovely insights into what's going on, and that's the beauty of this industry. It doesn't stand still. There's always, you know, something around the corner to consider. But really enjoyed chatting. So thanks for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.